Hi, this is Bruce Lindsay, working with Liz Gallo on our continuing effort to document the stories of veterans. Today we're with Coast Guard veteran Thomas Taylor, who just turned 100. For those who are not aware of it, the Coast Guard is very different during wartime. Mr. Taylor did not spend his time off the coast of the United States. In fact, he crossed the Atlantic Ocean multiple times on a destroyer escorting convoys.
My name is Thomas Taylor. I was drafted into the Coast Guard when I was 21 years old in 1943 into the Coast Guard. My first boot camp was at in Baltimore at Green Springs in Baltimore, and I was there for 3 weeks before I was lifted on the ship and went to Norfolk, Virginia, where I was trained with how to fire big guns and different kinds of military equipment that they used in the military. We were there about two weeks before we were assigned to a ship at Houston, Texas. The ship, we were all put on a Pullman train that went from Norfolk, Virginia to Cincinnati, from Cincinnati down to Birmingham, and from there to Houston, Texas, where the ship was commissioned, the USS Falcon, USS Menzies, I'm sorry. My first ship was the USS Menzies, which I was attached to at the time in Houston, Texas. Now the ship that I was listed on, we traveled from, after the ship was commissioned, we traveled from Houston stopped in New Orleans for 2 or 3 days, and from there we went to Charleston, South Carolina, which happened in about a month time. And before that, after that, I got sick on the ship, and I was attached to the hospital in Charleston there, where I was stationed for 2 weeks in Charleston at a Coast Guard base after my discharge from the hospital. I was attached to another ship, which was the USS Falcon, and the Falcon was listed as in Charleston at the time, and I was assigned to the ship at 4 o'clock on this Friday day for me to obtain permission to go on the ship. As I came down to the harbor, me and the Coast Guardmen that were with me found out that the ship had left the harbor and was out in the bay on its way down the Charleston River. So the Coast Guardman offered a solution. He said he would call up somebody on one of the shore bases, and we would get a small boat, and we would catch the ship before it got out of the bay into the ocean. So that's what happened. I was attached to the ship. I went up on the ship by what they call Jacob's ladder, to get up on the ship, and with my gear and everything. So I was attached to the ship, and we sailed out. That was what they call a shakedown cruise for the ship. When we went out of Charleston, went on a shakedown cruise for about a week, and came back into Charleston. We were attached to the division of convoy duty. So our first convoy, we went all the way to Cairo, Egypt, and in Cairo and back. We went back in Norfolk. The ship was attached to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It was where the Brooklyn Navy Yard was where the ship was assigned as any kind of reconstruction material. So that we were there for a week, and we came back to Norfolk for another convoy, and that convoy was attacked by it wasn't that convoy. I'm sorry. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But the convoys that we took then were stopped. Instead of going to Cairo, Egypt, we were stopped at the Rock of Gibraltar, and the British took over. And after the British took the convoy all the way to Egypt instead of us, so we were assigned to another convoy coming back, and our ships were anchored in Burzirti in North Africa before we came back, and I made eight trips across the ocean while I was in this service. And next to the last trip that we went across, we were attacked by a swarm of German airplanes. I think it was close to, it was two detachments, one for the southern part, and the what they call the back part of the convoy, which was 10 miles aft of our ship. We were proceeding. It seems like I'm getting a little hoarse now. I'm sorry to tell you, but I don't talk that much. But as the convoy was proceeding toward the destination, we were attacked by this German. In fact, we were attacked. This was not in the daytime. It was at midnight, and there was a complete moon blackout. In other words, there was a complete blackout. So we got information at battle station that we were being attacked. And while I was on the gun, I got information that there was a group of 3 airplanes that were 750 miles distance from the group. They were proceeding at, I think they mentioned as 250 miles per hour, so they would be in the area in 15 minutes. That's what they claimed. So, which was, I guess, was the actual thing. But when these airplanes came over, they came over. They were painted black, but they didn't have anything dropped. They didn't drop anything on the convoy, and in other words, they were just decoys. In other words, the attack was being printed at the back of the convoy. Thank you. That's a relief. But the attack was being at the rear of the convoy, which I didn't know at the time. But the front was decoys, but they were attacking the back. In fact, they sunk. That Destroyer Langley. Destroyer Langley was sunk with the president's treasurer's son on board, which he was one of the ones that was rescued later on. I learned this information. They sank a ammunition ship, and I think they sank 4 more ships in the convoy, in the back of the convoy at that time. Then, after this incident was over, we were proceeding to take another convoy back to Norfolk, and the ship that I was on, the USS Falcon, Menzies, was hit by a torpedo, and the whole rear end of the ship, the fantail was cut off, was blown up, but the front part of the ship floated. This is some information that I didn't learn until after the war. I did not learn this information until after the war, so I didn't know this at the time. But the USS Menzies was hit by a torpedo and cut in half. The whole ship the front part of the ship was floated into Algiers, where it was resided for a while, and it was recommissioned as a new ship. But all this information about the Menzies I did not know at the time. But we proceeded back on convoy duty, back to the New York, where we, in other words, we attached to another convoy at the time, and back and forth across the ocean, for what's convoy duty. But was the last. After this convoy, the next convoy went across the ocean. We got, I guess we were in sight of the Rock of Gibraltar, where we learned the information that the Germans had surrendered. So when we got into harbor, all the celebration was over. We got into the harbor 2 days later, so all the celebration was over. So after that convoy, when we escorted the convoy back to Norfolk, Virginia, the ship was given the information to proceed immediately to the Panama Canal Zone. In other words, we weren't going into New York at that time. The information was to proceed. We were to get fuel at Miami. We stopped in Miami and fueled up the ship and proceeded directly to the Panama Canal Zone. In the Canal Zone, I guess we were called a target ship for submarines. In other words, we were practicing. Submarines were practicing as a target. In other words, they were shooting dummy torpedoes at us, while they try to track ships, and they were. In other words, they were on station for sometime 2 or 3 weeks, and they would shoot these dummy torpedoes at us, and we would pick them up take them back to the submarine, and they would reattach them and shoot them at us. And that was the duty we were doing down there. Besides on goodwill trips, in other words, we were. That's what they said they were. We went into Costa Rica as a goodwill because Costa Rica was not part of the war situation. So I heard this after the war because they was trying to get Costa Rica to join the war against Germany at the time, which they were not in. So we went into Costa Rica and were there for 2 weeks as a thing where the sailors went ashore and, with the cities of Costa Rica. We went into San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica, and also later on we went across the equator. As I told him, we went down to Ecuador, and we crossed the equator went to Ecuador, and we stayed in there for 2 days. And when we came back, went to Ecuador, and another time we went to Venezuela. We went into Venezuela. We stayed there for a week before we came back. But we were on these were goodwill tours. That's what they told me after the war. I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was a part of the war situation, but it wasn't. It was something that they did with the ship in other words, to keep something going on the ship because there was no action, at that time. But after all these situations had gone on for a while, and I think we got orders in December that we were going to be transferred to the Pacific Theater. In other words, our tour down there was over. But then they dropped a bomb on the Japanese, and the Japanese surrendered, so that stopped us from going to the Pacific. And I guess the captain or the leader of the ship got orders that to proceed directly to Jacksonville, Florida, where the ship would be decommissioned, And that's what happened. The ship was decommissioned, and we were all put on trains to our different destinations and so forth, and like that, But during my time in the service, I don't know, I sort of, after it was over, I sort of enjoyed it, because I had a lot of friends on the ship that were very nice to me, In other words, I didn't have any problems on the ship, Just like I told you before, when I wanted to change my position as on the gun mounts, I didn't want to be down in the hold. I told the captain that was a bad position for me. He said I feel like I was closed in, So he put me on another position. On the next ship I got on another position as a gunner's mate on one of the guns up there. So that was a good thing for me because like I said, I enjoyed it because I, feel like I was treated right when I was in the service. In other words, they didn't do anything bad for me.
So you went over this, but I'm not sure if it was clear. The original ship that you were on was the Menzies, and then you were originally on the Menzies,
Menzies, right? Yeah.
and then you got transferred to the
Falcon.
But the Menzies that you were originally on,
I was.
one that got cut in half later on.
That's right. That's the ship that was hit by the torpedo and cut in half.
And if you hadn't been sick for those 2 weeks, you'd have been on that ship.
I rightly would. That's true. Yeah.
Did you have any funny stories, or maybe you mentioned that you were shellback? Maybe you could explain what happens there.
Well, a shellback is a party when you cross the equator that you become a shellback, what they call a shellback, and the captain. In fact, the captain gave me the job of these certificates. They gave out certificates. I don't know if you got it. You got a certificate? I lost mine. I left it in the house. When I left home, I left it in the house. But the certificate, with the captain, I was taking a course from they had something like the Coast Guard had this thing where you can get extra schooling from different kind of jobs that you want. Like if you want to be an accountant after you got out of the service, they would give you a correspondence course from this place that had all these different kind of jobs that you can learn how to do. So I was in a correspondence school with art doing artwork, like stuff like that. So there's a captain knew I was taking this art course, so he gave me the job of printing all these certificates. In other words, you put the letters in Old English, which I had to do for what is it? I think it was 215 people were on the ship there. I had to do it for 250 people. But he told me, you can charge them anything you want, but don't charge them too high. So I just charged them $1 a piece, and I printed all 250. He gave me all the charts, and on my off, I didn't do it on duty time. I did it on off time, when I was sitting down in on the deck down on what they call it, the mess deck. I would sit down there at night sometime and just do 4 or 5 of them, if the ship wasn't rolling too much, I would do them. If the ship rolled I couldn't do too much good work, But after I did a lot of stuff like that on the ship, for the different sailors and stuff like that,
One of the other things we talked about was how nowadays people think of the Coast Guard as being close to the coast.
I thought that too. Yeah.
But you were back and forth. How many times did you say?
8 times. 8.
Escorting convoys.
Uh-huh.
So I read that you were a welder at some point in your life. So can you talk about that a little bit?
When I was in high school, we were. I think after I graduated from high school, they gave us a job cutting down these trees in this area where they were gonna separate the area from and putting houses up there. So I got the axe and I thought I'd cut it down like I noticed these people on TV, and I cut it in the wrong direction, and it fell on some wires, and it cut the lights out for 3 houses up there. So the guy that run the thing came. Hey, what are you, Mr. Taylor? What do you do that? I show you not to cut down. He said, well, I seen the people do it on TV. No, not TV, but I see them doing it in the movies, because TV wasn't informed at that time. He said, well, don't do anything next time. But then he told me about a program they had for training people to be apprentices in welding and electricians and stuff like that, and tin makers and stuff like that. So I took up the welding as a welder position, which was very good for me because after you were there for about 6 months, they sent us to Westchester, Pennsylvania, at a seminary, at a training school where we were going to be transferred to the shipyards, because they were making a lot of ships for the war at that time, because the ships were being torpedoed right outside the harbor. When they went outside of New York, got outside of New York Bay or down the Chesapeake River, they were being torpedoed, and the ships were coming back with holes in them. And at the time, I noticed, they were coming back with holes in them. But I was a welder at that shipyard before I went into service. It was one of the, like I said, one of the trade I learned. After you got so much training time, you were transferred right into the shipyard. In other words, it wasn't a Navy shipyard, but it was a outside shipyard, which needed welders at the time. So I was welding there before I went into service. I was a welder.
You also talked about the years you were in, 1943 to 46. Is that correct?
What's that?
The years that you were in on active duty. You went in 1943?
43, yeah.
To 46.
To 40, by 46, yes. Yeah.
So you're 100 now.
Oh yeah.
How's that feel? What's that like? Did you ever make it?
That's what they say. A lot of people don't make it. I don't. Actually, I used to know how many people at this age were still living, because I don't know how many is living now. But they said me the count is way below 80,000. I think something like that. Way below 80,000. I don't know how many are agile or something like that. A lot of, but most of them are very unable to, do as many things as that's what they say as I'm doing, getting around as much as I do, But I don't know. I try to keep healthy all the time. You're not what you call like I see some of these people in this institution here taking so many pills and stuff like that. And like I said, I don't take as many as the other people in here. But it's I don't know if it's a blessing or what it is, But I've had a blessed life. That's what I can say, Yeah.
What are some of the things you've seen change over 100 years
Change over what?
in the world? Like you've seen a lot of things over 100 years.
Well, just like with that camera there, you see how so much things have changed with this camera position you got taking pictures of me. I was after I came out the service, I went into photography business for a little bit. I got you remember the press cameras they used to have with the big flashlights on? I had one of them. I used to take pictures. I would go to the people's houses, baby houses, and take baby pictures. I'd bring a reflector background, a white sheet or something like that to put this shit out there, and take pictures of the baby and develop them. I used to develop them, and I had an enlarger, which could enlarge them up to, well, I never got to enlarge any pictures over 8 by 10 because I didn't have too much room to move around in the dark room, I don't know if you know how to do that kind of stuff, but I used to do all that myself, Yeah. But other than that, like I said, I've never had any problem trying to find a job, and I try to be as religious as I can without going to church. I don't. Like I said, I don't go to church every Sunday, but I'm not a heathen or one of them other people that they call them that do a lot of illegal things. It's not like that, but it's just what you do, And I try to live decent,
If you had any advice for young people who are watching this, what would you think? What would you think they would want you could tell them?
Well, what I could say is try to learn everything you can about what's going on about you, and what's going on in the world, and people. And one thing about me, I was always interested in what's going on outside. In other words, I started reading the newspapers when I was I think about 6 years old. There was one of my neighbors was a newspaper deliverer. He used to take newspapers from the Johnstown Tribune. I don't know if you know that. Well, he used to be a deliverer for the Johnstown Tribune, and he lived next door to where we lived at. So we used to go to his house, and they used to get all these papers from different cities, like Los Angeles, the Times. And I started reading the New York Times, and I've been reading that ever since until I came up here. But I used to read the paper every day to find out what's going on in the world in other places besides where I was living at, So that's one of the things that I found that I'm interested in, reading about things going on all over the world, Yeah.
Well, thank you. Appreciate your sharing your story with us. And
What's that?
I said, appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank
I appreciate telling them to anybody that wants to hear them, Yeah.
All right. Thank you.